Hey, how's it going?
We'd like to ask you some questions, sir.
Welcome to my crib. You can even see inside my refrigerator later. So, welcome to my fish room, and hope you're doing well. Today I thought we'd do a little fun thing and answer some of your questions. So I made a post a while ago, and a lot of you had some different questions. So I thought, yeah, let's go ahead and just do a fun Q&A video here. So I'm gonna do some stuff in the fish room, and Matt's gonna ask some questions, and yeah, we'll be good.
Moroccan is asking about old school fish keeping myths. And I'm gonna throw a little twist on it. What are some of the old school fish keeping myths that you still hear these days?
Oh, gosh. That's a good one. I honestly don't hear that many myths. The problem that I see is like when I go to a store and I hear an employee giving improper advice, and a lot of the one is just like, yeah, just wait one day, you know, set up your aquarium, wait one day, and we'll test the water, and then you can add fish the next day. And I think it's probably not a myth. It's probably the most dangerous advice that's given on a consistent basis. It's probably happening right now at some fish store somewhere in the country or the world. Is someone saying, yeah, you know, set up your tank, come in tomorrow, we'll test your water. If it's good, you can add fish. 3 weeks later, your fish will be dead. A lot of times it doesn't happen because, you know, your fish survive and they get through that whole nitrogen cycle, but it's terrible advice. Yeah, I don't really know about any myths that I can think of that are wrong. I think there are some practices that people used to do that there's better ways of doing things now. Like back in the day, we all used under gravel filters. So I was, you know, many years ago, my aquariums all had under gravel filters, and that's kind of how the way we did filtration. And that's still very effective, but there are easier, more efficient, better ways of doing it. It doesn't mean that under gravel filters are bad, because they are still good in a lot of applications, but there are other ways of doing it. So yeah, I don't know if there's like, I'd have to like search the forums and see something, but I think a lot of those have been fixed by the internet and, you know, videos like these.
Well, Moroccan is also asking about some of the cichlids, and he's specifically with the peacocks and the haps. How do you get them to max size?
Well, so what I've always done, and people when they come in my fish room and they see my fish, they're like, wow, how are they so big? And I think it's a couple of things. One, it's quality food, and two, it's quality water. So if you have a fish that's living in poor water environments, so here we have like, and it's hard to tell on camera, maybe I'll put my hand, but like this fish here, it's easily 7+ inches. I have big hands and it's big. So some of these are really large fish here. You can see the big nuchal hump. So if you have a fish that's living in an environment where the water quality is poor, any organism, any person living in a poor situation with poor environment around them, you're not going to be able to thrive. So let's take fish for an example. If your fish live in a condition where the water parameters are bad, it's, you know, the pH level's wrong, there's ammonia, there's excess nitrates, it's dirty, their body is focused on survival. It's focused on, how do I stay alive? How do I make sure I have enough oxygen? How do I keep myself from getting ammonia burn? And less about growing. But if the water conditions are really good, if their body doesn't have to think about fighting off infections and illness and poor water quality, it can focus on growth and color. And then obviously food is a big thing. So you'll hear things like power feeding. In fact, someone asked me this the other day, what's the difference between power feeding and overfeeding? And it's two different things. Power feeding is a controlled, specified kind of objective of, I'm gonna feed my fish larger quantities over a specific amount of time, where I'm monitoring and making sure that I'm getting the results that I want. And overfeeding is just not paying attention. It's putting too much food in the tank and letting your fish get fat and unhealthy and fouling the water. So power feeding can be very good with certain fish, because you'll pack on size, you'll pack on the color, it might get them in breeding mode. So quality food, the right amount of food, and good water quality is usually what I tell people and how to get larger peacocks, haps, any kind of fish.
Well, Joe's Aquatic World asked about a 75-gallon African cichlid tank and how he could switch from freshwater to lake salt.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. So I, in fact, here, let me just grab some here. So this is the stuff that I use. This is the Cichlid Salt, Cichlid Salt from Fritz. And this salt, it has like probiotics in there, and it's designed to replicate the water parameters that you find in the rift lakes of East Africa. So if your fish are, first of all, if they're fine, and they probably were bred in just regular water near you anyway, I wouldn't worry too much about trying to replicate, you know, the rift lake, but maybe getting a little bit closer. So maybe at your next water change, you don't want to, you know, immediately change everything because that's going to mess the fish up. But maybe on your next water change in that 75-gallon aquarium, add a tablespoon or two of that cichlid salt in there. And the next water change, maybe add another 1 or 2 tablespoons, and then gradually over a period of time, test your water, check the pH level, check the hardness, the carbonate hardness, see how it's doing, and eventually it will, over a period of time, get it to where you want to be. So anytime you're changing things in an aquarium, you don't want to make it immediate. You want to make it over a period of time slowly. So I have brackish fish, and sometimes the brackish fish that I have that are supposed to be kept in brackish water, which is a mixture of salt and fresh water, they might be kept in freshwater environment at the wholesaler or the fish store. When I get them, I will slowly, gradually, over a period of several weeks, increase the salinity level of the tanks that they're in to get them to the right level. So just do it over time and it should be fine.
Mr. Richard Family is asking about ideas for a 20-gallon for a beginner to maybe harder to keep fish.
Well, a beginner, I would not recommend harder to keep fish. I think for a beginner, it's important to learn the basics, understand fish husbandry, learn how to keep a balanced aquarium, learn how to cultivate live aquarium plants, learn how to, you know, handle water changes, changes in water parameters, things like that. So I would say that for a 20-gallon, for a beginner, I would recommend a planted community aquarium, because with aquarium plants, it's going to help to mitigate a lot of problems that you might have. It's going to help to correct the mistakes that you're going to have in your aquariums from just being a beginner. And then with a community tank, you can try different types of fish, and as long as they all can cohabitate, you're not stuck to one type of fish. If you're like, you know, you want to try some Tanganyikan cichlids or something like that, you're going to be stuck with Tanganyikan cichlids, and you're not going to be able to try pea puffers or gouramis or, you know, white cloud minnows or whatever it is. You're going to be stuck to those Tanganyikans unless you completely change out the tank. But if you do a community tank, you can try different fish, and as long as they can live together, it's fine, and it allows people to experiment and learn about what they really want to keep. And usually what will happen is, as a beginner, you get a 20-gallon aquarium, you set it up, you make it a community tank, and then 2 months later, then you're like, oh, I want to do something different. And then you buy a 40-gallon or 75-gallon, and then you start to get into multiple aquariums and you can try different things.
I Am How I Am is asking, here's a tricky one.
All right.
How to go from gravel to sand on an established tank without moving the fish? Well,
I would recommend not doing it that way, as it's going to be messy and probably very frustrating. Can it be done? Yes. If you're going from gravel to sand, you could do things like getting a dustpan. So you could get a dustpan, a clean dustpan, and scoop out the gravel, put it into a bucket. Obviously, you don't want to take out the water, so you'll have to let the water drain out, scoop out the gravel, and then add the sand. The problem is you're going to have this, your water is going to get so cloudy and so muddy looking that you're not going to be able to see the fish. You're not going to see what's going on. So my recommendation is just, if that's what you really want to do, if you want to go from gravel to sand, then take out the fish, put them in a bucket, throw an air stone in there with a little pump, and then drain out the water till it's really low, get that dustpan or some type of container, scoop out the gravel. You can use a shop vac and kind of get all the little excess pieces, and then rinse your sand and add that. problem is you're going to have, you know, some bacterial issues because all that beneficial bacteria in the substrate's going to be gone. You know, sand, not great with plants. So depending on what you're keeping, if like you have like an African cichlid tank and you want that sand look, I could understand, but I would say go the other way. If you have sand, maybe try gravel because it's going to be better long-term.
Evan Rifkind has a two-part question here. How can hobbyists help conservation efforts? And what is your own take on wild-caught fish?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I think people have different opinions about it. Now, when it comes to wild-caught fish, I think there are people that do it well, and people that probably do it in a way that's not great for the environment or it's not great for the fish. So in a lot of situations, wild-caught fish actually is more sustainable because if you are buying fish that are wild-caught, they're usually coming from a country or some area where the economy is not very strong. Maybe it's from Peru or Colombia or something like that. The wild fish that you're buying is actually helping the people that are collecting those fish maintain you know, some type of income and have that lifestyle to where they want to keep that river free and clean and, you know, debris free and not having, you know, something else happening. If we don't buy wild caught fish, that same area might be cleared out and they might, you know, do some other kind of development or something else, and it could harm the river. And that's what they've been kind of looking at, like things like Project Piaba and stuff like that, is making sure that when you know, fish are wild caught, that it's done sustainably, that it's done in a way where the locals can support their way of making a living, and that the ecosystem remains intact. Now, in other cases, yeah, I'm sure there's many fish collectors that might do things unethically, or, you know, maybe I think this might be more of an issue like on the marine side. If you're taking corals and things from the wild versus like growing frags, I think that's a real issue. As far as sustainability, I would say probably the biggest thing, obviously, besides, you know, making sure that the fish are coming from a source that's responsible, is water. So water is a very finite resource, and depending on where you are in the country or the world, it can be a scarce commodity. If you live in a desert, you don't want to be wasting water. If you live in California like us here, we don't want to be wasting water. So things like ensuring that you're not just pouring water down the drain unnecessarily, that you're using things like live aquarium plants, that you're not overstocking your aquariums if you don't have to reduce the amount of water changes. Or if you are doing water changes and you need to, like I need to do all the time here, I will actually try to save the water. In fact, I took a bunch of water. I took about 50 gallons of water yesterday out of this room and watered plants. I watered my neighbor's flowers. I watered my shrubs and flowers out in the front of the house. I poured some on my neighbor's tree. Another thing that I do is I actually I'll collect plastic bottles. So, you know, my father-in-law goes to Costco and he buys a bunch of cranberry juice or whatever, and I take the empty bottles and I fill them with old tank water, like when I do a water change or I'm cleaning a sponge filter, and I fill up these bottles and then I give them to all my friends that have houseplants. So my wife takes bottles to work, and all of her colleagues at work, they have houseplants or plants in their office, and they all want this fish water because it's high in nutrients. So it's terrible for the fish, but it's great for plants. So they take that wastewater, they're pouring it into their houseplants, their orchids, whatever, and they're flourishing. And then it's a great way of repurposing not only the water, but also the plastic bottles.
Larissa K is asking about outside ponds and tubs. Do you have any suggestions for balconies and apartments for smaller tubs and ponds?
Yeah, I think I have a tub that's like 10 gallons or so, right around there. So it's not that large, and I've got like guppies in there in my office. So yeah, outside, it's going to be dependent upon temperature. If it's super hot outside, you want to make sure that you keep it in a cool area in the shade. If it's super hot, or if it's super cold, you want to make sure that the fish can handle the cold weather, or you bring the fish in the wintertime. But really, whether your tub is 20 gallons or 200 gallons, it's the same thing. Again, with stocking, making sure that you're not overstocking. Use plants whenever possible. It's going to help. Obviously, like things like evaporation are things to worry about. So smaller aquariums or smaller tubs outside, if it's 10 gallons and if you ignore it for 3 weeks in the summertime, you could have a lot of evaporation. So you'll want to make sure that you're topping off the water, things like that. But, throw an air stone in there, throw a sponge filter in there. It should be fine. They're super easy. So many people do them. on my balcony, I have like a 500 gallon, and I'm in San Francisco, but I've got a 500 gallon pond basically that I built. But you could do, you know, the same thing just in a much smaller scale, really easy.
Sarah Lloyd is asking about tank mates for multis.
So tank mates for multis, you want to do something that's going to be okay with their water parameters. So multis are from Lake Tanganyika in East Africa, so alkaline water, high pH. So you could do things like, you could do live bears if you wanted to. You could do guppies or mollies and stuff like that. You could do like Cyprichromis, which is a small kind of schooling fish from Lake Tanganyika that they kind of call them like the sardines of the lake. You could do other like rock dwelling fish. You could do like Juliochromis or things like that. The main thing is you just want to make sure that your multis have lots of shells and that they have a chance to get established before adding other fish, so that their area, their territory, their fry are safe for the most part from predation, and that the other fish that are introduced can kind of have their own space. So as an example, like this tank right here, now I do have Calvus in here, which you don't want with multis probably because they're too big, but they're all hiding right now. But like the Juliochromis, like something like this, if I were to line the bottom of this, I know this tank looks kind of dirty right now, but if I were to line this entire tank on the bottom with like 30 snail shells like we have in this tank here. So if we were to take like this kind of setup and have a bunch of shells and then, you know, add them to this tank and let the multis get established so that there's a colony of, you know, 15, 20 multis, then I could add a couple Juliochromis. They might pick off a couple fry here or there. But as long as you're, you know, feeding the tank well, they're going to kind of inhabit the whole rock area, and then you can have multis have it in their shell area. So basically you just want to have a habitat for each type of animal.
All right, so the last question I have here from Nabokov Fan 7.
Yep, he's a hockey fan. Okay.
Oh, okay. And this is about how you and I work together. How's it working having a editor? What's the workflow? What do you do on your end?
Well, I'll tell you that on my end, it's a lot easier because I'm not stressing about editing a video, and allows me to focus on work. So as many of you know, my full-time job is basically managing the social media work on Aquarium Co-op. So that's what I'm focused on. So I'm making sure that I'm, you know, looking at marketing things and products that we're doing and videos, and I don't have to worry so much about editing a video, which takes a lot of work, which we could ask Matt about.
Yes, it does.
But the workflow, I think, it has been working. It kind of ebbs and flows depending on me. It's really dependent upon me. So if I have the chance to film a video, so sometimes what I'll do is I'll just come down here and film like 2 or 3 videos in an hour. And then what we'll do is I'll put them on my Google Drive, and then Matt can then remotely pull it and download it. And that's how most kind of editor and creator relationships work, because it's not common where they live in the same area, unless you're a really big channel. A lot of times they are remote, and even if they are close by, they'll still do it that way. It's just a lot easier. It's worked well, and on my end, it's made life so much easier. Honestly, the way things have been going, if it were just up to me by myself, I'd probably get 1 or 2 videos out a month. And the fact that Matt's helping and doing all the hard work, we can, you know, mostly get out a video once a week. So it's been great.
Because I pressure you.
Yeah. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's it for this video.
All right. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this little fun vloggy style Q&A. But I just wanted to address a lot of your questions and hopefully have answered them for you.